Hello and welcome, one and all. We are doing another polýMATHY podcast, and today we have Colin Gorrie, expert of all things languages and linguistics, and in particular, Old English, which is something that I'm very fascinated to learn. How you doing, Colin?
Well, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on. I am doing very well. And yourself?
Oh, I am extremely well, and I hope by the end of our chat today you can tell me how at least to do those basic greetings in the Anglo-Saxon language.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so before we're gonna do, just for everyone out there, we're gonna do introductions and let's do some more interview things with Colin here. But I am just too darn eager to see this book. I talked about it in the not the last video, but the previous one about the Italian to Latin, since Colin is teaching with a direct language method book at the Ancient Language Institute right now. So take it away, my friend.
All right, let's see if I can get the screen share going. Can we see?
We have share. Ooh.
All right.
Se forma capitol.
Se forma capitol. Westu Hall, Luke. Westu Hall.
Westu
Hall. Westu Hall. Hello.
Westu Hall.
Westu Hall. Hall. Healthy. Hall. Hail.
Hardy.
Gold. And West to Hall. Westu Hall.
Westu Hall, Colin.
Gold. And this is Oswald Bera. Oswald Bera. What is Bera? Bera. Oh. Bera. Oswald Bera. Oswald is his nama. Min nama is Colin. Din nama is Luke. And his nama is Oswald. Good. This is Oswald Bera. Se forma capitol. Se forma capitol. Mildthryth is mith. What is mith? Mith. We need a bigger brush. There we go.
Did a video about that last year. Un pennello grande, un gran pennello.
Mith. This is mith. On the mildthryth is mith. Here nama is mildthryth. Good. Mildthryth. What's the hall ich mildthryth? Mildthryth. Good. This is mildthryth. Mildthryth is mith.
Mildthryth is mith.
On New English, Mildred. Good. Mildthryth is mith. On the mildthryth ville stär ge hiran. Stär. What is stär? Harry Potter is stär. Se Holbutla, The Hobbit is stär. Elles what is stär? Stär is Harry Potter, The Little Prince is stär. Mildthryth ville stär ge hiran. God. Ge hiran. Each
Mildred is mith.
Gise. Gise.
Gise.
Her is meid, and her ville stær je hieran. And that's there. That's there. Here fader. Here fader. Mildred fader. Ich je telle stær. Ich je telle stær. And nu, look, ich je telle the stær. Ich je telle the stær. Be Oswald Beran. And this is that stær. This is that stær. God. Nu. On Englalande is sum holt. What is holt? Holt is... This is holt.
Holt.
And on Englalande, what is Englaland? Englaland... Englaland. And on Englaland is sum holt. On Englalande is sum holt.
On Englalande is sum holt.
Sådlige. On Englalande is sum holt. And on holte, on tham holte, is sum bera. Is sum bera. Sådlige. Is sum bera. On se bera hatte Oswald. That is, Oswald is his nama. Se bera hatte Oswald. Wes thu hall. Ich Oswald.
Wes thu hall Oswald.
Oswald is his nama. And Oswald Bera wunath on holte. He wunath on holte. On holte. He wunath.
Wunath.
He wunath on holte. Wunath Oswald on huse? What is hus? Hus.
Nu.
Hus.
What is no?
Nese.
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 Ne wunathe on huse. Akon holte. Ne wuniat beran on huse. Bera wunath on holte. And here is hit. Where wunath Oswald Bera, he wunath on holte. And look, hwa wunath on holte. Hwa.
Hwa.
Age to Oswald.
Oswald is Bera.
Oswald is Bera and wunath he on holte?
Yes.
Oh, sådliche.
Oswald wunath on holte?
On holte.
On holte.
Sådliche. Well sidest du. And what, look, is Oswald?
Oswald is Bera.
He is Bera. Sådliche. God. He is Bera. God. And fourth. Is Oswald where? What is where? Where? Ich where. Ich where.
Thu, where? Thu,
Du art.
Thu art, where? Where?
Soldice. Soldice ich where. Und ist Oswald where?
Nese.
Nese. Nis he where. Vitodlice is he bera. Vitodlice. Vitodlice. Vitodlice is he bera.
Witoji se bear.
Vitod.
Vitod.
Vitodlice. Vitodlice.
Vitodlice.
Vitodlice is he bera. Viton. Vitodlice is he bera. God. Und on Englelande is äk som tun. Tun. Und tune sind on manie hus. Und zwar es ist tun. Und on Englelande is äk som tun. Und se tun hatte Wintonchester.
Wintonchester.
Und on New Englische Winchester.
God.
Så is it. Und ne wunath Oswald bera on Wintonchester tune. Where wunath he, Luke?
On Holte.
On Holte, sodliche. Und och hva wunath on Wintonchester? Se König. Se König. Se König. Se König wunath on Wintonchester. Und is se König bera, Luke?
Nese.
Nese.
Se König nice.
Nis se
Nis.
König bera.
Nis se König bera.
What is he?
Se König is where?
He is where. He is where. Well sagtest du. Se König is where. Und what hatte se König? Des König hatte Adelrad. Where är mich? Adelrad. Adelrad is his name. Is se König weef? Weef. Weef. Is se König weef? Nese. Nis se König weef? He is where? He is where? Och sum weef wunath on Wintonchester. Sum weef wunath on Wintonchester. Hva? Se Queen. Se Queen is weef. Se Queen nis heo where? Och weef. Se Queen is weef. Und heo wunath on Wintonchester. Heo wunath on Wintonchester. Und what hatte se Queen? Se Queen hatte Alfjevu. Alfjevu is hier een name. God. Nu, se König on se Queen wuniath on Wintonchester. Och Oswald bera wunath on holte. Oswald bera wunath on holte. Wuniath, look, wuniath se kuning on se queen on holte?
Nese, se kuning ak
And
de kuning ond seo quen wuniath on tune
on tune. On
tune.
wintan chastre
on
tune.
weekend chaster.
God. And he wuniath on tune. And look, wunath Oswald bera on tune.
Nese, on holte.
On holte wunath he. God. Sod li che. God. He wunath on holte. Ne wunath he on tune. And hui wunath Oswald bera on holte.
Fui.
Hui. Oswald wunath on holte for thamthe he bera is. Oswald wunath on holte for thamthe he bera is.
Forlante hebera es.
God. Hui
Fui.
for thamthe da.
Forlante.
For thamthe he bera is.
Forlante hebera es.
Beran wuniath on holte. Na on tune. Beran wuniath on holte, na on tune.
Swa.
Swa is hit.
Swa is hit.
And wuniath manie beran on holte? Manie. On bera. And pretend all of these are little bears. Manie beran.
Manie beran.
Manie beran. And wuniath manie beran on holte? Nese. Ne wuniath manie beran on holte. Luke, ne wuniath manie beran on Englalande. Oh. For Oswald.
Alon? Is Alon?
Onleach.
Onleach.
On
Oswald is
Englalande.
Onleach.
And ok on tune. Wuniath manie weras on tune? Manie weras. On where manie weras. Weras. Beran. Weras. Manie weras. Wuniath manie weras on tune? Easy. Manie weras wuniath on tune. On ak manie weef.
Manie weef.
Weef. God. And on holte. Fairway weras wuniath on holte. Fairway. Ne manie ak fairway. Fairway weras wuniath on holte. And ak fairway weef. Elles what is there on tune?
Elles
what elles is there on tune? Elles on New English. Oops.
Else.
Elles. Och det otherwise. Elles
Elles
what? What elles is there on tune. Good. On tune syndon manie hus. On tune syndon manie hus. On hus, manie hus. Und hui syndon there manie hus on tune.
Hui?
Hui syndon manie hus on tune.
Forthemthe hit tun is.
Sodrice. For them the hitunis. Othe, for them the manie veras on weef. There wuniath. For them the there manie veras on weef wuniath.
Forthamthe manie veras and weef wuniath.
Sodlice.
On tune.
On tune. So well sidest tu. Well sidest tu. Well. Sidest.
Well sidest thu.
Tu. Well sidest tu.
Well sidest thu.
Well sidest tu. Und easy. Se König on se quen wuniat on tune. Wuniat hi on lytelum huse?
Lytilum.
On lytelum huse? Och the on Michelum. Michelum huse.
Michelum.
On Michelum huse wuniat hi. Ne wuniat se König on se quen on lytelum huse. Hi wuniat on Michelum sele. Sele is Michelhus. No, Lytelhus. Sele. Oswald is Michel Bera. Och his holt is Lytel. For them the he on Lytelum holte wunath, he wille his holt Jewitan. Jewitan. Hu. Jewitan. He wille his holt Jewitan. What wille Oswald Bera? He wille his holt Jewitan. Und look, hui wille Oswald his holt Jewitan?
Forthamthe Seholt. Lytelum is.
Forthamthe Seholt Lytelis. Sodlice. Und he wille äk tungeseon. He wille tungeseon. He wille veras on weef jeseon. He wille hus jeseon. He wille adelrad König on alfgive quene jeseon. Look, he wille middanjard jeseon. What is middanjard? Middanjard is... Middanjard is...
Midgard?
Sodlice. Middanjard. He wille middanjard jeseon.
He willa middanjard jeseon.
Sodlice. Und zwar ist hit med Oswalde. That is
Cool.
se forma capitol.
And that's chapter 1. Wow. All right. Round of applause for that. That was extraordinary, Colin. Wow. That is so cool. My experience with Middle English until this very moment was extremely limited to, God, I just looking at maybe a bit of grammar, the inevitable dealing with languages like one does. One learns a couple things about, Old English here and there, but I can't believe how rapidly I learned. Of course, it does help to speak a language descended from it, but it is remarkably different. But it doesn't take that long to get used to. I think it definitely had some advantages, having had just like I remembered seeing nese and yese somewhere. Like maybe I looked up the etymology of yay and nay, and maybe that's how I saw it. But so that's wow, that was so cool. So that's chapter 1, and that's I guess what you do as part of the first lesson with.
That's right.
Students, huh? That's amazing.
We get out the whiteboard off to the side and draw our way through it.
That's great. And so those of you who have joined us in the middle, we just did a very short introduction of Colin Gorrie, who's teaching us Old English today. And he teaches the Ancient Language Institute. You can sign up for classes at ancientlanguage.com, which is great. I'm certainly amazed that this is a thing. Now, this book, tell us about the book. Tell us about the genesis of it,
Sure,
what it's similar to, and what's going on.
Yeah, I'll put myself back up here so I can see you
Yeah.
on a bit of a bigger screen there. Yeah, the book is the result of my own really positive experience with things like Familia Romana, which I think is really for a book that is as old as it is still very fresh and kind of really sets the standard for ancient language pedagogy, I think. A fantastic book that I didn't use myself in learning Latin, but I do use in teaching it. And I wanted to bring that spirit to Old English. With Old English, we have some different challenges and we have some advantages as well.
Tell us. Well,
with Old English, we are dealing with a language. If you speak modern English, and if you're listening to this, you do, there are lots of cognates. Not cognates, really. There are ancestor words. There are things like hus, which mean house. And it's often, if you know a little bit of the history, the phonological history of English, you can pretty easily work out what the modern equivalent of the word will be. But of course, sometimes this is hard because the words have shifted in meaning, and there's just a lot of words who don't survive into modern English. So
Evitan for leave. The only thing I could think of was like evitare in Latin, but I doubt that's connected to it.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I don't know what the etymology of that evitan is.
It just means to leave. Do we have any cognate descended word in English?
I don't believe we have anything descended from evitan in modern English.
Cool.
So because of these links, I can be more aggressive with this book than I would otherwise be. Then I think more aggressive than Familia Romana can be outside of its first chapter. In the first chapter of Familia Romana, we have a similar situation where there are tons of cognates, Arabia, Europa, things like that, that most people approaching the book will already know without any special effort. We have a lot of those in Old English, many more so than we have in Latin. So we get a lot of things for free, and the book can be faster as a result. So I think we covered in that first 50 lines probably something like the amount of grammar that you cover in the first 2 or 3 chapters in Familia Romana as my kind of, that's my comparison point, because that's really the major inspiration for this book.
Sure. I mean, it's nice to makes something perfectly abstract. But Famiglia Romana definitely takes into account that you already read the Roman alphabet, and you're going to recognize a lot of words. Eventually, after you see them more than once, you're going to figure out what a lot of these things are, cognate and so forth. It's, it has certain expectations. Since everybody does know some English, it doesn't seem unreasonable to take that for granted.
I think especially because if you were to draw a Venn diagram of people who are inclined to learn Old English but don't want to touch modern English at all, that would be a very, very small, tiny little almond in the side of that, in the middle of that Venn diagram. So I feel okay in assuming a certain amount of English, of modern
What are the
English.
disadvantages, though, with respect to, say, learning Latin via this method, this reading immersion method?
Less attested. There's just less Old English written than there was Latin. Old English is actually one of the better attested historical languages, like one of the best, but Latin has a lot more. And there is a lot of stuff to do with daily life that we don't have in Old English. So things like, people always want to know how to say good morning. We have no evidence that anyone said good morning in this period, at least until Latin. Yeah, exactly.
Latin. So that's Middle Ages Renaissance neologism to say bonum mane salve. So wis hall, wis thu hall. That's
we
it.
have things like these: wes thu hall, wes thu jesund, si jesund.
Wow.
Which,
sei gesund.
Exactly. If you
that's actually, I do know. I remember taking German in high school, so I do have having the German connection. It definitely helps.
And in Yiddish, actually, that's the standard way of saying goodbye. Sei gesund.
Beautiful.
So I feel this sort of Germanic languages connection every time that I delve into Old English, because you can say si jesund, and there it is. It's perfect cognate.
Si gesund. Yeah, that's great.
So there's that. I think actually approaching this from German might actually be easier than approaching it from English, just because of the greater stored vocabulary.
And
so for example,
grammar too, right?
And grammar, yeah. So V2 word order, you experienced a little bit in this V2 word order. For those who haven't seen that acronym, it's where the second constituent in the sentence wants to be the verb. So if you take a sentence like, I live in a town, and you want to mess with the word order a bit, you can, as long as you keep the verb second. So in a town live I would be the modern English equivalent of that.
Wun something each.
Wunie
each.
Mm-hmm. So Old English has V2 word order like that, of a sort. It's not as strong as it is in German. It's kind of in a transitional phase throughout the Old English period. And the Old English period is pretty long. Something like 600 years, depending on how you count it. So
it's pretty good.
Yeah. So you see a lot of changes over that time, and the conventional periodization of, hey, now the Normans have invaded, we've all stopped speaking Old English instantly. That obviously wasn't a thing. There's a lot of continuity behind the scenes, but when you do get that change, a lot of the writing drops out, so you can't see the changes as you might otherwise.
That's interesting. We have a number of good questions. I happen to see Logan's here. What kinds of literature is the corpus divided into?
The corpus, the Old English corpus, is divided into religious and secular literature on the one hand, and poetry and prose on the other. And so you get this kind of four-way division that nicely cross-classifies like that.
Nice.
And there's really something for everyone. If you're interested in religious poetry, you can pursue the Old English Genesis poems, which are basically Paradise Lost in the style of Beowulf, and they're fantastic.
Wow.
There's secular poetry like Beowulf. Probably the thing that most people gravitate towards. Certainly I did when learning Old English. That was my way in, as I'm sure it is for many people.
Wow.
And then there's, there are things like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, so secular narrative prose, and then there are lots of homilies, Bible translations in religious prose as well. So there's lots of stuff.
Wow.
For a historical language, it's amazingly well tested. We just don't have all the things that you might want to put into an intro language class.
Well, I think that's, while one can find things for Latin and Greek, I think they're harder to come by, especially since, for two reasons. One, the cultivation of high literature and its selective preservation, and the other reason, because the reason that stuff's been preserved is because it's the best and it's what people ended up caring the most about, not the though we have it, the hermeneuomata, the interpretamenta, Latin to Greek, those kinds of things, which are, in fact, even the Latinists I know, some of them who speak Latin, who are some of the founders, if you will, of the movement of teaching Latin in a spoken way, don't even respect looking at that literature at all, because they see it as a distraction from getting inside the proper language, because it's more towards what one might call vulgar Latin. So, and it's interesting. There's a difficulty there anyway, but I imagine it's certainly a greater challenge with Old English.
Well, we can do things that are kind of analogous. We can calc modern English onto Old English. Like, I could say, "How goes it with you?" Right? That's a pretty Germanic sounding sentence. We don't have that attested, but who got hit midday?
Who got it midday? No, yeah, that's not very Germanic.
It works. It works. But it's not attested, so you have to make a decision about how where you want to stand on that question. I haven't been. So obviously, some people are of the opinion that you shouldn't even be composing in historical languages, which I obviously don't agree with, because, But
I remember
I think
Jackson Crawford making that, telling me about that, both on video and hearing him tell others about that particular problem. Now, my only contact, extremely limited though it is with Latin and Greek teachers, professors, and most of the ones I know are fascinated by or actively teach the languages in that kind of way. But I have had some rare contacts, so I can only imagine. And I have occasionally, seen a comment or heard directly interact in some way or another with, the people say, well, like it's wrong, that's not real Latin. It's like, but Erasmus was writing in Latin. Well, Erasmus, that was Latin. But you
come back to me when you're Erasmus.
And it's like, and it's interesting. There's it's too difficult to get into the merits of debating whether or not Apuleius is worthy of the people. But I know people, Latin speakers, who are some of the best there is, teaching and speaking wise, who don't have any interest in something like Apuleius because they think it's not good enough, which is very interesting. To, like, I mean, I get that. I feel that way about Dante's Latin. Dante's Latin is awful, and it's unpleasant to read. But so I get everyone has their limits, I suppose. But I think it's interesting that exists. But then tell us a little about what your interaction has been with the old or ancient Germanic languages teaching experience community. I assume you have some contacts there.
I mean, it's been pretty positive. People are excited to see more Old English, I find. And because I come from an academic background, I think it might lower some potential resistance in that way. I don't even really think legitimately, because I make mistakes like anyone else does. But I think people are often more prepared to see that coming from a linguist rather than from someone on Reddit that has just their username and we don't really know anything else about them.
Fair enough. Can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I am a linguist. I trained in theoretical linguistics of the kind of Chomskyan variety. Although people who do it don't like it to be called that, but I feel like I have one foot halfway in and one foot halfway out. So
And I neglected, just through my fascination with getting ready to the Old English, neglected everyone to tell you to go subscribe to Colin's channel. And I think, is this the right link? Did I spell the name?
that's the right link.
There you go. That's the one. YouTube.com/Colin Gorrie, or you can spell it thusly, schwa, and and find it right in YouTube. Subscribe to his channel because he does so many. Colin, you do so many things. You do live streams at least once a week, and often you're involved in conlanging in Tunisian into a different language, and truly talk about theoretical and then practical application of some really advanced stuff.
We have a lot of fun. So the channel was an experiment that I started last December. I've been teaching courses for the public for a few years now, and I thought, well, instead of teaching 5, 10, 15 people for 6 weeks, why don't I just teach everyone who wants it? And so just put everything up online and see who's interested in linguistics and other related nerd stuff. And it turns out that there is a contingent out there.
There's a need.
There's a deep hunger for fun language-related stuff online. Who knew, right? So we do sort of linguistics explainer lectures. We conlang together. I've got a nice little community. Shout out to the people on the Discord. I know some of you are in the chat there, who are really involved in this kind of collaborative world building project where we basically try and flex our linguistics skills, our linguistics muscles, and make up languages that reflect certain features of real world languages. But we then take them and evolve them into descendant languages and create whole language families and try and reconstruct proto languages from currently attested languages that we're making up. We do all sorts of fun stuff.
Wow, extraordinary. Well, what did I? So Old English, since that's my particular focus on as far as your artes go. Why should any of us out here bother to learn Old English? What value does it have?
Oh, there's the question. Well, I can think of a few reasons why you might want to. One is you love etymology. You are interested in why English is the way it is. I don't know if you know anyone like this, Luke. But if you are interested in the reason why English is the way it is and its relationships with other languages, Old English is a crucial component to understand this. You can start to see, the farther back you go with any two related languages, the more like each other that they look. This is what it means for them to be related by descent. So the farther back you go with English, the more it starts to look like Latin or Sanskrit, or a little bit closer to home, Old Norse or Gothic. So it's really fascinating from that perspective. You get to understand a lot about modern English, but there's also the angle that there's some amazing literature written in Old English, and you're not getting the same thing if you read a translation into modern English. Look at how many translations of Beowulf there are out there. For sort of a quick answer to that question, why? Everyone's got their own opinion about how to do it. Do you want to translate it into modern English poetry? Do you want to translate into a modern English thing that uses the poetic devices of Old English that don't really quite work the same way in modern English? Do you have it in rhymed verse, which they didn't in Old English times? Do you put it into prose? Do you make it self-consciously archaizing? Do you use the first word of Beowulf is what? The archaizing translation is low. But there's a version out there now that translates it as bro. So there are a lot of...
From low to bro.
From low to bro.
It's not what? I mean, is it not what?
Some people translate it as what? But this is, in one word, why you need to read the Old English, because people are making vastly different decisions when they translate into modern English, and you want to understand why that might be. It's a totally different experience reading it in Old English. You hear the alliterative verse, the meter, the poetic devices work differently. You get things like, not to the degree of that you find in Latin literature, but you get things like periodic sentences where you have to sort of wait for it until at the very end, 5 lines later, the verb drops, and you see what exactly they did with this person's head. That's an example from Beowulf. They found it, by the way. Spoiler alert.
That's good. Well, I always wanted to learn the languages. Sorry, I'm thinking half in Latin for some reason, which have had contributions to English and Latin, Greek, French. I know those, and I always wanted to get around to Old English, and I never had a way. It looks like you're creating that way now. Can't wait to.
We're building the bridge. You got to collect them all. Just you'll only be missing Old Norse after this.
Oh, you're darn! I forgot about that. I shouldn't have written our what are they called? Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue by John McWhorter. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that component. And of course, that was a very good, life-changing book. You're right. I have to learn Old Norse. Well, I'll talk to Jackson about that. I'm sure he'll be able to help me out at some point.
Maybe we can adapt Oswald Bera.
That's a great idea. Licensing. That's a great idea.
The Empire.
The Empire of the Bear. This Old English singing bear. Yeah, you had me at Magical Talking Bear. Absolutely, that's.
I think there's my thinking in creating this particular story, which is an unrealistic, sort of fantastical, fun story about a bear wandering around in Anglo-Saxon England. It's because it's fun, it's memorable. When bears get into crazy situations with monks and brigands and things like that, you remember, and maybe you'll also remember the 20 words that you learned in that chapter. And maybe you'll also remember this grammatical construction that you learned in that chapter. These things do help. And I think it's a missed opportunity when we write pedagogical material that's, I don't know. I went to the corner and I saw someone walking by, and then I walk. We want to come on. Let's get the fun going.
Right. Yeah. It's that. Of course, I can only imagine the calculations you're doing to try to keep as much. One needs to learn up, down, left, right. I certainly like the Polis books, Polis Institute stuff, where they're not designed to be read on your own. I like taking them and try to work my way through them. Once you learn 2 or 3 languages, it gets to be a little bit easier to work your way through something that's not necessarily user-friendly. But that kind of method really makes sense if you're in a physical classroom, you have a teacher who knows the language fluently and can tell you to stand up, sit down, go over there. But when you're teaching online, like you're doing, like we've both been doing for a long time, it's so much, it's great to have these kinds of narrative things. We don't have the advantage of the TPRS, so we have to enjoy vicariously the TPRS experience of our characters.
Exactly. There are some concessions we make to the format. So with this book and with the books like it, you have to decide whether you're going to try to make it in principle accessible to someone in a self-teaching situation. That's the dream, right? That's why there's only Latin that's one reason why there's only Latin in Familia Romana. It's that, if you're in Mongolia, if you're in Namibia, if you're in Bolivia, wherever, you can approach it. But there's still a difficulty with that, which is that you're still relying on the fact that people are going to recognize what Arabia is, and people are going to know what the Latin alphabet is. And these are challenges.
Logan, with another great question. What do you think the greatest limitations on a book of this type are?
Myself, it's the fact that you do really need a teacher. I think that you could conceivably do it without a teacher, but you need a teacher because you're not going to get all the input you need just from this one book.
You need for what?
You need for to complete the process of language acquisition. It's not going to happen with I'm looking 78 pages so far. You need.
How much is Familia Romana? Logan would know off the top of his head. It's only a couple hundred. I mean, 78 is, especially for a language which is remarkably, I would say, easier to acquire. Why could 100 pages, give or take, not give a similar basis?
Or you'd have to
For an
read it a
English
few times.
speaker, let's say.
Just because there's just a kind of number of hours that you are inevitably going to have to put in to getting input in the language before the process kicks off.
Could you reread the book?
You could, and you should. You should put it under your pillow and go over it.
We need to buy it. I'm ready to sell this book. I want to buy it. I want to sell it. I want to.
And I think this is something that is underrated for people learning ancient languages and people learning languages in general. It's just reread your materials.
Yeah.
You didn't get everything the first time. You didn't get everything the second time.
Oh my gosh, I can vehemently attest to that. And this is Rafael Torrejano, his Paleogloss channel, of course. It says that Famiglia Romana is 35,000 words, so that's good. And which that's actual number of words. Yeah, that's not the individual word count. I think it's 5,000 and unique words or something like that. But exactly. I mean, that's a technique that Logan really keyed me into. And then there are techniques of extensive reading, which is I took other people's ideas and I made a video a couple years ago about the technique that I recommended to students about the rereading of a text. So I want to reread your book. Actually, and that is a good segue if you're would like to share your screen again, because I want to ask some things about the chapter in the modern English,
in the modern tongue,
in the modern common,
in the modern tongue. Let's do it. Share screen. That's the right one, right? Yeah. Allow. Perfect.
Splendid. Okay. Could you zoom this by chance?
Yes.
The text.
I can just pull this over.
Yeah. I don't think we'll. Yeah. Thank you. Because I don't think we'll need the. And go to the first page a little bit. So, so what I'm going to ask in a moment is about phonology, because why not? And let's see. Let's just notice another question here. And yeah, if you do have questions out there, here's one. Did you use Anglo-Saxon poetic influence when you were writing the material? That's a good question. I don't know anything about the prose poetry differences.
So basically, as soon as possible, this kind of gets into the philosophy behind writing this, which I differ a little bit from the LLPSI, the series that Famiglia Romana is in. Mm-hmm. I differ a little bit from that philosophy. I'm more willing to just give you grammar that you aren't quote unquote ready for, because we know that the grammar gets acquired in an order that has very little to do with what teachers want or plan for. So I include what grammar is necessary to tell the story. And given that, I am always looking for opportunities to put in authentic material into the book. It doesn't happen. You don't have the vocabulary, you don't have the reading experience until chapter 7. And that's when I start putting in basically like very lightly adapted quotations from Alfrich or from the Rune poem or from The Wanderer, things like that. They increase in frequency as you go.
Extraordinary. Yeah, I was thinking of, what was I thinking of? Actually, Famiglia Romana actually does not have a good reputation, even with some of these famous Latin-speaking professors who teach in living way, because the Latinity is not good enough, because it even does that kind of thing where and now I have a very high opinion of the book. It taught me Latin. The method of Warburg absolutely taught me Latin, but more than that, and now that I'm at the level I can recognize what he's doing. He includes different styles. We have, of course, we're replete with the poetry in the last chapter, but then it's basically the letter of chapter 33, if I recall. The brother, Aemilius, writing to Aemilia, it's basically Caesar's prose. Like, it's distinct styles that become clear to an expert. But you get, as a student, you just get exposed to the variety of things. And I'm of that same mind, too. In fact, I would rather do it deliberately, to have something so that I've seen this before. I don't need, like, I can learn good prose in Old English after I've acquired the language. And also think about how people acquire, maybe it's English or whatever language. I love learning languages through song. There's a lot of poetry, a lot of figures of speech in song that aren't necessarily part of the written language, or much less the conversational one. So I certainly don't think there's any reason to limit oneself in such a composition.
I think
Well, go ahead.
the way the sort of snippy way that I say it when someone asks about this issue is that I'm not really the teacher. The Beowulf's poet's your teacher. Like, Alfred is your teacher. These are the people. I'm just introducing you to them. I'm just giving you a way that you can get to them as quickly as possible. And then, well, don't throw it on the ground. I mean, put it on a desk or something. But you don't need this book after you're reading Beowulf for pleasure. And I think that students are aware that there are some compromises with practicality that are made in, look at this first. This is technically a sentence, right, of Old English.
Yeah.
But it's not the kind of thing that you would normally necessarily see that often. It's a very simple.
I also don't see bricks alone that often.
Precisely.
I usually see buildings that are fully constructed of basic materials, but I do, if I had to build a building, I'd like to start with the components.
Precisely. And you will learn from the greats. You just have to meet them.
Well, we're of one mind there. Mildruth, Mildruth, is it voiced, the thorn?
Neither thorn will be voiced because they are protected by stops and
and final.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mildruth.
Yes.
Is maith. So
right,
this is this the IPA, the true A?
This is
on the true letter A that's on the front axis?
This is your low front, debatably exactly where that is, because even in the IPA, phonologists and phoneticians differ in what they mean about what they consider that AE ligature to indicate. But it's something like A, like the modern English A as in hat.
Oh, okay. So this is the IPA ash.
It is.
Which is like most American accent at.
Mm-hmm.
So maith.
And the G is just a yod, so a yeah. The G with the dot above, that's an editorial helper to tell you that this is a palatal G. There are two basic pronunciations of G and C in Old English. One is palatal, one is velar. So we have G or R for the velar G and Y for the palatal G.
What makes it? What makes the frication happen?
The frication happens intervocalically.
That's easy enough.
In the case of the velar G, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because the frication is actually original and the stopping happens after a nasal or at the start of a.
Simon Roper did a video maybe a week or so ago about, or maybe it was a different one, but I remember he did. Yeah, no, it was from a week ago. He showed the passage from Proto-Germanic to modern English words, and goose was one of them, which was ros. Is that right?
Like Rans to
ros. Right, it was Rans.
Yeah. And then in later Old English, that initial fricative undergoes fortition and becomes gos.
Now, linguist friends, sir, how does a fricative undergo fortition? Especially, I mean, is it just because I don't have any explanation? I'm used to things becoming fricatives and then disappearing. I'm not used to getting them back.
Okay, so there are, it's a two-way street. You have the one way, which is lenition, which is stops becoming fricatives becoming approximants, then deleting, or maybe they skip some of those steps. And that's what we see in a lot of the Romance languages. We see things that are intervocalic, stops that are intervocalic becoming fricatives. So P becoming B, voicing first, and then V, and then V.
Lovo.
So exactly. However, fortition also happens. It's just a lot less common. Fortition happens. Okay, let's think about why lenition happens. Lenition happens because it, as the name suggests, it's weakening of a sound. So you have these sounds that are pronounced in between two vowels, which are very sonorous, voicing heavy sounds, right? So think about something like let's just use ata as an example. You have to shut off the voicing, shut off the airflow, make the stop, and then start it all up again. Well, let's just say it's not geminated. Ata. But geminates are another case. So you have to stop the voicing, stop the airflow, stop everything to make that stop. Hence the name, right? And then start it up again. That's effortful. It's easier sometimes to just carry the voicing along. So instead of ata, we have ada. And then maybe you don't do the full closure with the stop. So you do ada.
And wait, was approximate or fricative the next stage?
Fricative.
Okay.
Yeah, fricative is often the next stage, but it's not a hard and fast rule. Every language does it differently. Some languages do voicing only, like voicing as voicing lenition only. Some do manner of articulation lenition only, like Irish as an example. All of the lovely sounds that have an H, the sounds that are spelled something H in Irish, are the result of some lenition in an earlier stage of the language. So you have p becoming f, never voices. So the pathways are not always the same.
That it seems to be I was just thinking of Tuscan because I was reading that book D'Achille that I was talking about in the 2 videos ago, and he mentioned, because I've always been fascinated by the what is it called, the Gorgia Toscana, which is the modern Tuscan habit of aspirating, or in fact fricativizing, intervocalic P, T, and K sounds. So parlato can sound like parlato, and
Right.
And even the bilabial fricative for P. So I can't think of an intervocalic P at the moment, but anyway, it does that. And I remember no one told me about this because I thought, oh, I'm going to go to Florence, learn Italian. This is, over a decade ago. And then I thought I couldn't understand a darn thing from anybody. Luha la scena pronta. I couldn't understand a darn thing. And but it's interesting because the traditional explanation, which I just assumed was true before I learned any better, was that, it's from the substrate of the Etruscan language, because that's a language which had similar features. And I don't think there's anything behind that at all, because it's just lenition of intervocalic stops, exactly like in almost every other Romance language.
It's really, I mean, it's the difference is that it doesn't go down the voicing route first, but lenition is such a natural sound change. It's very, no one would be surprised. A linguist finding a language like, what? Stops underwent lenition intervocalically? I've never seen such a thing. No, this is like the most common thing in the book. So it's very, the bar is high for suggesting substrate influence in cases like that. And in general, the bar is high for suggesting substrate influences at all.
Rafi has a good
beautiful
one. I capitani becomes
I capitani.
Thank you. I couldn't even do it. I capitani. Very good. He also mentioned, of course, fortition with bida.
Yes.
Bida.
So that's what I was going to go down this road. So we've given the explanation of lenition. It's essentially an environment that favors voicing and continuous airflow. So the sounds move in that direction. You can think of even most North American English, seri, that's a voiced r sound. So this is the same kind of lenition going on. But In certain cases,
City?
city, like city.
Oh, okay. You got it.
Clapping. Yeah.
Yep.
Or
City.
rider.
Rider.
Although that
Rider.
one is voiced to begin with, but
Writer.
Raider. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
just to answer a quick question here, is the Latin case system comparable to German and Icelandic? Yes, they have the same common origin in Proto-Indo-European. So back to the Old English.
Fortition. To finish the story about fortition.
Oh, right. Fortition.
Yeah, we gotta get to the bottom
goose?
of fortition. So fortition usually happens in places where you do not have you don't have a vowel in front. You actually see fortition most commonly syllable or word initially when the thing before that syllable is not a vowel. So something like a nasal, which is why you get think of an example. This is why French has these weird changes, like what's a good example? Challenge from calumnia.
Wow, I didn't even know that's where that came from. Wow.
Yeah, so challenge,
Calumnia.
the modern English word challenge comes from calumnia.
That is a very interesting change.
Yeah, what's happened is
I think I missed an L, everyone. Sorry.
That j was a y, the calumnia, which has now become syllable initial after a nasal, prime place for fortition. So you get calumnia, calumja. And this is also what you have in for word initial yod that comes from Latin, like junior or Julius. That's going to become a j or a j in most Romance languages for this same reason. Anyway, so that's fortition.
Yeah,
and that's the same environments in which you get fortition of that fricative r in Old English as well.
Reminds me of another Tuscan thing, which is the verb to turn something off is spegnere in Italian, but in Tuscan it's spingere, which they use proudly, thinking it's better true Italian.
It is almost criminally underknown about, if I can use that morphology.
No, this is English, yes. Sir.
The variety within Italy, linguistic diversity within Italy.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I barely know anything. I happen to live here sometimes, so I get some exposure to the extraordinary variety, and I'm in love with all of it. It's so cool. So it's basically just it's fortition. Is it, I guess, fortition in initial position of the ra?
The ra, yeah. So god, good, coming from something like rod, and also fortition after nasals. So a G, is there anyone on here? There's nothing on this page. But things like singon, to sing. That is going to be a stop. But if you see something like, or englalande, there we go. Not englalande. That's difficult because you have this nasal in front of it. That's a good place for fortition.
Interesting. And so that phoneme just falls out of the language.
Well,
after Old English, I mean.
Well, it's still the thing that gives us the madness with through, though, laugh.
Middle English.
Yeah.
Does wait, is it still voiced in Middle English?
It devoices word finally. Actually, it devoices word finally in Old English too. So, yeah, probably. I mean, a lot of the stuff has to have this probably disclaimer, but I feel like just put a probably disclaimer on the whole thing. Bracket it all with probably.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Well, let me see if I can do more. So, will is wants, right? Mm-hmm. Like will in German.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mildred will. She wants to hear the boy.
Stad is not boy. Stad is a story.
Story.
That's what I was trying to say, like Harry Potter, The Hobbit. But I see why that might have been misinterpreted. I'll have to keep that in mind. Whenever you try and think of an example at the blackboard, it's always like, oh god, stories. I know stories. What's a story? Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Stad from Historia.
I was gonna say,
although
this is one
it's
of the
taken quite a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tremendous, because story is, I assume, right out of Norman something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas stad probably, it may have taken a detour through a Celtic language before it got into Old English.
Raffi asks, what's the deal with the father versus fader? Was intercality a fricative?
It wasn't at that point, but there was this later sound change that turned those kind of trochaic D's into thes. So fader, modor. This is
Mordor. No, I'm just
this
kidding.
is,
Sorry.
and it actually gets reversed in some cases. So burthen becomes burden in modern English.
And then there's Marther, which was current. Actually, I think there are some dialects in England that still say something like Marther for murder.
That's
And
another
it's,
one of those words.
was that in Ireland? It's in Ireland. I know it's. I think it's still in Ireland in some dialects today. But yeah, murder was fricative. That's interesting.
Most foul and unnatural.
I think Raffi would call that lexical diffusion. Because he told me that term the other day, and I just wanted to use it.
Indeed.
I don't know if it's right.
Yes, no, that's right.
Oh, good. Yeah. All right. Like, and fox and vixen, is that lexical diffusion?
That's okay. So that's an interesting one. The initial voicing of fricatives was I believe it's a Southwestern dialectal feature.
That's a dialect joining thing. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about modern English is that it does not. Well, okay. This I have to asterisk this a bunch, but the dialect that we learn in Old English classes is basically either early or late West Saxon, depending on who's teaching it. That is not the ancestor of modern English.
And I believe that's also true for much of the literature, right?
Yes, most of the literature, what is the literature attested, is West Saxon, either early or late. Late West Saxon is not a descendant of early West Saxon either. So there's a lot of strange stuff going on. But
Are you telling me that modern English doesn't come from Old English, but from vulgar Anglo-Saxon?
So delice. Yeah. So essentially, modern English is the product of a lot of dialect mixing in the London area, but primarily it's a Mercian dialect that's giving us the base. Because London is it's in geographically a really interesting spot from an Old English dialectology point of view, because it's sort of on the border of three different dialects: Mercian, Kentish, and West Saxon.
This is so opportunely coincident with my reading of the historical grammar of Italian, where I just was learning that Tuscany happens to be right on the border between a lot of other Italo-Romance stuff, northern dialects and varieties, and the central southern Italian things, which do very different things. Like the vowel breaking doesn't happen in some places, and it's right on the border, and also even within Tuscany, you get these weird mixes explaining bizarre things that just don't make sense. They don't follow the rules. And I'm sure you could find examples of that in other Romance languages. I just happen to be intimately familiar with the annoying things that aren't irregular.
Oh yeah,
why is this not an open vowel? Darn it!
The regularity is kind of regularity of sound change is something that is kind of an idealization,
right?
And if you were to have a completely regularly derived modern English, it would be very different from the language that we have. There are lots of words where we have to invoke an exception. Dialect mixing, maybe lexical diffusion. We have all sorts of ways. Analogy. It's not the neo-grammarian dream of universal exceptionless sound changes, sound laws, as they would call them.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, it's just like spherical cows in physics. Precisely. Where you reduce things to basic principles so that you have a framework to know pretty much what's going on, and then the varieties of, you add the coefficient of friction, and then you get modern English.
Exactly. Yeah, it's we can look at the treatment of the velar palatal G's and C's. So Northumbrian didn't have this ch, this palatalization of ch. So instead of church, we have kirk,
Right.
right?
Kirk. Yeah.
In Scots, which descends from Northumbrian. So,
Mm.
and some of those words came into modern English. And then there's also the effective Old Norse, which didn't have that either, and is close enough so that people could take in some.
Is there a fortition thing that is provoked by Old Norse, or is
It's
in that kirk church distinction?
so chiriche is the West Saxon form. So what happens with you have all these doublets in modern English, like, well, maybe they're not all doublets, but you have some like shirt and skirt, where we
Those are
have the palatalized form
directly
and the
from-
non-palatalized form.
That one's directly from Old Norse, right?
I think probably, although there's always this question of, was it maybe from Northumbrian, which also is pretty coextensive with the Danelaw. So when we get the Old Norse speakers in England, they happen to also mainly be in touch with the people who spoke these varieties that didn't have this, which were actually more like Old Norse in the fact that they didn't have this palatalization.
Wow.
Yeah.
By coincidence.
So, pardon me?
By coincidence.
Yes. I don't think they planned that. Yeah.
But beautiful. Okay, so let me learn the classical standard Old English in front of us here. So Mildtruth is now, okay, short I. How do you realize that as a lax vowel, or would you recommend?
You're asking all the good questions. So there's a debate in the literature about how the short vowels were realized. And it's kind of parallels the debate in Latin historical linguistics. Were they lax, e, u, or did they only differ from the long equivalents in length? And it's very difficult to say. So for pedagogical purposes, I am agnostic, and I will.
That's the right way to go, for sure.
I will tend to lean on the length as the distinction because I want people to hear it. As for what I think happened, I really don't know. I think it had to have happened sometime. So the question is just, was it by the Old English period that this change came about?
Well, here I'm going to double plug my own secondary channel. So this live stream, along with all the live streams, will appear, everyone out there watching, will appear on the polýMATHY Plus channel, which is the secondary channel. So you can go. I'm going to go rewatch it too after it gets uploaded, because I want to see your lesson where you taught me for 20 minutes out this first chapter, because I want to really learn the material, which is really cool that we got to do that. Also, there in the next coming days, I'm going to be releasing a 2-hour plus polýMATHY Plus discussion of the lax vowels in Latin. And one of the arguments I wanted to tackle that Alan brings up and Adams supports is that, well, languages with phonemic vowel length tend to have centralized short vowels and peripheralized long vowels. And then I looked at vowel spaces of all the phonemic vowel languages I could think of, and it doesn't seem to happen that much.
Yeah, this is a problem. This is a real problem.
It's like, I just took it for granted. Like, okay, I guess that's true. It's like Arabic. And I looked at Arabic. No, but Arabic only has 3 cardinal vowels, and then Finnish doesn't do it. Hungarian barely does it. So then I started thinking, maybe this isn't really a thing. I didn't really. So, but you're the linguist. So what is the situation?
Okay, so this whole kind of argument, like languages which do X tend to do Y, is you really have to check the data, because especially earlier works will make those kinds of generalizations based on like 3 languages. So it's not. I tend to be really suspicious of those kind of claims, and I think that's my prejudice in the neutral sense of the word, is to come into a claim that's made using that typological evidence with skepticism, because the fact is we just don't know that much about linguistic diversity. We don't know what the possibility space of what makes a human language. We don't really know what that is, because best case scenario, we have 6,000 data points and rapidly dwindling. We don't have very good descriptions of most of them. We tend to study 2 or 3 a lot, and the rest less so. And here's a little thought experiment, and this is very near and dear to my heart. If, say, the Americas did not exist, and people came up with a theory of what language is without Quechua and without Navajo and without, all of this, and without Inuktitut, we would have an impoverished idea of what a human language could be.
Right. Which is where most, I think, philologists come from. They learn French and Latin and Greek.
It happens in every language. French, Latin, Greek, yeah.
German, and French, because I mentioned that they have to read all the philological stuff.
Yeah. So in historical linguistics, we get a lot of these kinds of arguments. Like, it happens in lots of languages, and then they name off the 5 that they are their usual go-tos. And I understand why it takes, to become a historical linguist, you have to really go deep into your language family. It's very hard to devote the resources to go broad. But if you want to make typological arguments saying that this is a natural sound change, you have to go broad. And so historical linguists are in this really impossible situation where they have to go both deep and broad, and it's just difficult.
Well, I feel like with my, I assume those who've followed me for a while, they know I've gained some notoriety for challenging Sidney Allen on specifically this thing about the lax vowels, which is why I wanted to talk about it more extensively, very extensively, in this future video coming out on the secondary channel. And the reality, and I've been like, oh, Allen, I think I've come off, and this is probably a fair description of how I've come off, is, oh, Allen was just some idiot who only knew French and German and didn't know Italian. Like, I'm sure I've come off that way. The reality is, we live in the internet. I don't even know where you are, and we're talking in perfectly live time, and you're thousands of miles or kilometers away. And we also have access to incredible libraries of audio material, of pretty rare stuff. Yeah, it could be richer. We could get a way more audio samples of like dialects of Italian or accents in England. But to do so people from their armchairs, like me, can do kinds of research at a level of detail and comparison that was simply impossible to great minds of the past. Much as astronomers before could only imagine what we could just, let's see what the James Webb Telescope has, and you just marvel at billions of galaxies on screen, a concept that couldn't even be proved before. So that's the kind of thing that we can benefit from. So
we have a difficulty, especially when we look at Allen's work, who was writing at a time when experimental phonetics was very much in its infancy. So given that, I think that,
and his
as
works
you
are
say,
so important. I love the books. I carry them wherever I go.
Yes. Yes, they are very good.
Yeah.
On the question of contrastive vowel length and quality distinctions, it is often the case that there's sort of double marking of a distinction. And then this is probably the most well known. So you have a length contrast and a secondary quality contrast. And then the question is, what do you do about that as a linguist? Do you say, well, length is primary, and in trying to distinguish these 2 phonemes, there arose a secondary quality distinction? Or do you say there's a primary quality distinction, and the ones that are more peripheral are, realized longer? What do you actually posit is represented in the minds of speakers? Because that is really fundamentally, I think, for most linguists, what the object of study is. So, and maybe that the answer to that question is different for different periods of the language.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's how you would get
rattle up some chronologies for Latin's development.
That's how you would get the development in, say, Western Romance that we did, and actually we funnily do see that exact change of like pirum to pera used to talk about when Latin loanwords came into Old English. So, there are some words that show the lowering of those short high vowels, and some that don't. Kind of interesting.
Really?
Yes.
Could you be, now that we're talking about it, could you be any specific examples?
Yes. Copor, copper.
So that's the lowering of u to o.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let's see. Copor, but kyperen, of copper, made of copper, the adjective, shows I mutation of u to e, u to y. So kyperen has to have been borrowed as coup.
There's
Like
no way it could have been some
Cuprinus.
kind of Greek "u" that was retained in some bizarre educated person's voice that got
So
transferred? Or is it, it's too quick. It's got to be a
the
coincidence.
evidence of direct Greek Old English, direct Greek influence in Old English is basically just chiriche. That's the only one that's like pretty clear.
Okay.
The rest most likely are all through Latin.
Then that might say ecclesia, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's directly from Greek? Why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, likely. Because so in the early Christian communities, like really early, a lot of Greek speakers, the Lord's
Right.
house gets adapted into chiriche.
Oh, it's
Kyriak.
Kyrios. Oh, why did I
Yes.
thought it was ecclesia for some
No.
reason.
So this is why
I'm starting
it's
with chiesa in Italian. That's why it
Mhm.
sounded like Kirk. Okay.
Yeah. So it's
Kyrios.
Kyriak. I don't know. My Greek's not very good, but Kyriakon or something like that.
Yeah, Kyriakon. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't think of that.
Yeah. Chiriche. So that
That's
shows us
striking.
that, and note that doesn't have the rounded vowel in Old English. So it was borrowed as kiri.
That's very likely directly from Greek. So yeah, I mean the presumption that the upsilon in the classical Latin pronunciation is somehow getting into Old English is beyond preposterous. So forget I said it.
Just the dates don't
No,
line up.
there's no chance.
Yeah.
But I was just having fun.
With Latin influence on Old English, we're talking, some stuff in the Proto-Germanic period.
Mhm.
Like, what would be a good example? There's a word rumonis that is reconstructed as Proto-Germanic rumonis and romani. It's the Romans. And
right,
yeah,
Romans.
and it shows up in XIII, an Old English poem, as rumwalum, as the Roman foreigners, the Roman in the dative plural. So that one, and we see that in I think Gothic as well. So that probably is back to Proto-Germanic.
Wow.
Yeah, but then the rest, we have the pre-Christianization loanwords, and then we have the ones that came after Christianization, which are probably from reading pronunciations rather than from spoken everyday, what was by then rapidly diverging into the Romance languages.
Amazing. I had so many more questions, which means we're gonna have to do this again. But wait, okay. Rafi had a question. How distinct was contemporary Mercian from West Saxon? Would a modern English speaker find Mercian any more intelligible?
Doubtful. So it's not. So it's distinct. It's mainly distinct in a few vowels. It's not that much more comprehensible. I mean, it still has the same case system, the same kinds of, the same different word order, the same very different lexical stock. For that, we've lost so much of the Old English lexical stock in modern English, so it wouldn't be, I think, very much more comprehensible, especially because the modern English vowels that descend from those are so different. So, like, for example, late West Saxon cheese, the word for cheese, which is also a Latin loan, and boy, that vowel has taken another trip.
Cassium, yeah.
Exactly. So we go from Cassio probably, the form that it was borrowed as, to cheese.
Yeah. I can say queso in Spanish, so a to e seems probable.
Right. Then under the influence of the palatal in the next syllable, that's why we get queso in Spanish. But
Okay.
in the case of Old English, it's something similar. We have casu going to casu, and then
Umlaut.
palatalization to chasu, and then maybe there was diphthongization after that palatal to chasu, and then the I mutation from that next palatal is giving us chusu, chuse, cheese. And then we lose that later vowel, and Bob's your uncle. But in the Mercian form, we get chese, which is the ancestor of cheese. So in that sense, is chese more comprehensible than cheese? Actually, cheese sounds more like cheese than chese to me, but anyway.
Does to me too. Why is that?
U, E.
Oh,
it's just a
U
difference
it's
in
higher.
rounding.
That's why it's the front vowel.
Yeah.
The question about the keyboard. I use the Latin extended keyboard, and I think all the characters you have here are just Latin extended, right?
Yes, and this was made in LaTeX, so there's not a lot it can't do. If you sacrifice enough of your time, vitality, joy
You're paying
to it, yeah.
forward the time and vitality.
Yeah.
Vitality of Beowulf, or no, of Oswald in this case. Oswald. Okay. So he had a father. Ich jetelestar.
Ich jetelestar. I will tell you a story.
Ich jetelestar. I'll tell you a story. So the a is back unrounded. A, and.
The A. So this is interesting. Before nasal, it was probably rounded a little bit as well. But it's
being
back.
not the dialect which becomes modern English.
The interesting thing is in manuscripts, we get confusion of A and O in front of nasals all the time. So you see OND, you see Engla-lond, OND.
Engla-lond.
And so the usual interpretation of this is that there was something in sort of halfway between an O and an A when you have a nasal following. So ond, low back rounded is how it's usually interpreted, and that's what I've tried to reproduce.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I actually hearing it at ond. What language is ond? I guess just something Old English I've seen. Ond. Anyway, the did it unround later, or is it that just not the genetic relationship to our modern English and?
That's a good question.
Could have unrounded. That happens.
Yeah, I believe it did. I believe that was what happened. But I'd have to check that. I don't want to speak ex cathedra on that.
Ons thesis that star.
So eventually, when we get the nice typesetting and everything, this is going to be a scene break. But there's a frame story, the story of Mildred and her father telling the story. So Mildred wants to hear a story. Her father says, I'll tell you a story. And this is the story. And then Oswald Bera is the story that Mildred is told by her father. And then we periodically, this is a bit of a preview, we periodically step out of the Oswald story and hear from Mildred and her father. And this is a way that we review vocabulary, because Mildred makes some comment on what's happened so far in the story every 7 chapters. Oh, father, I don't like this one character. Why don't you? Well, because he did XYZ, review. So it's a way of sneaking the medicine into the peanut butter to give to the dog. I don't know if you've ever done that.
Yes, and both literally and figuratively with the teaching. That's very good. Or tried to. I don't think I could have mastered something like that. That's very, very cool. What else do I want to ask here? Wait, there is in. The word in exists.
Yeah,
right?
it does exist, but it's not really current in West Saxon.
Okay, so our word in from Proto-Indo-European "en" is just less mutated than this West Saxon thing.
So that does occur in Mercian. So, for example, what vegardena in jardagum theod kuninga thrymje frunon. First line of Beowulf. In. And that's because Beowulf was not originally a West Saxon composition. It has been West Saxonized in the manuscript form, but it
Just
was
like
not originally.
Homer. It's been passed around the dialects.
Yep.
Here, Iole, you want it? Take it, Boeotian. So that would give credence to the idea of on coming from in because of the rounding in front of nasals as a phonetic habit.
Oh, you see, I think that I don't know about whether
I mean, there's an
in
in
can
German,
go all
right?
the way to o using that. I think on comes from somewhere else.
There's an that's in German, right? An
Mhm.
I want to say an dem Tisch doesn't sound right to me.
But it's cognate with that. I'm almost certain. I could be completely
I mean,
be completely
wait. I'm
mistaken,
sorry.
but
Hold on a second.
I believe it is
We have
cognate with that.
on in English. Is this our on or is
Yeah,
this a
this is
different
our
on?
on.
This is our on. But
Yeah.
where's in?
In is just not in this dialect.
So we
So
get
we
is
have
this another dialect mixing thing to get two thing in and on?
you. So that's a really good question. I don't know what the circumstances which led to in and on having the current division of labor that they have. Maybe that's it. I will have to look that up.
I mean, Latin only has in, and
Mhm. I
then
mean,
Romance
many
innovates and
Indo-European
onward.
languages only have that. Only have the one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is extraordinary. On England on England is some halt, and I never. This is the in some kind of indefinite article
Mhm.
equivalent, right?
Yeah, it's like, well, actually, we have this usage in modern English. You know, you're telling a story. So there I was, and some guy walks in and says to me,
Oh.
"That's some this a certain, a particular."
Yeah, it was the way you taught, which is so interesting because I wasn't following the words very closely, but I was listening to you, and I found it so interesting to have understood the indefinite nature of it before I got the cognate with some hold. There was some hold, like yeah, like it was the fascinating experience. A language, so I mean, this is the closest I guess we get to Romance speakers hearing Latin. It's like.
There's
You know.
something familiar about that. Well, the reason that I use that approach where I don't dwell too much on things like that is that I want to get people past the decoding habit.
No, you're right, and you did great.
So I dwell a lot on things that are content words. Like, let's look at this weef. Let's look at this hoos. Let's do a bit of circling around it, and then we can dwell on the parts that are communication, and the other parts are backgrounded. And guess what? Your mind's also learning them too. But
Extraordinary. Okay. On Holta, how is the L realized?
probably velarized like modern English.
Holta is Sumbera. Does it? I know
And we
Holz in German. That one I got like German. As you said Holta, like I heard Holz in my head somehow.
yes,
Has that become anything in English?
it's in a lot of place names.
Yeah, Holz. Okay,
Yeah,
but not
but
a
I don't think it's
cognate.
current.
Yeah,
Yeah, other than that.
extraordinary. Is Sumbera.
And
What?
one thing that's interesting is that we actually don't have that much reduction to schwa for most of the Old English period. So on englalonde. Towards the end, you start to see confusion in the orthography of unstressed vowels, really. So e and o start to be flipped in suffixes, and then it's like schwa emerges. But earlier on englalonde.
On Englo-Londe. I think someone may have asked also what if you could date the pronunciation, what would you date it to? That
I
you
would date
use?
it. Yeah, I would date it to. I would date it to around the year 1000. Although I am doing some pedagogical archaisms as well. So it's kind of an accent from nowhere that's meant to make all of the distinctions that you are going to experience.
That's a
So
perfectly reasonable thing to do.
let's see if I can find. This is. I want to find an IE.
Yese?
Yes. Oh, that's not the best example because it's got a palatal in front of it. He, H-I-E. Where is it? The pronoun that means they. He.
He.
So the way this was
He.
pronounced, this writing actually shows up very, very rarely in early West Saxon, which is not the best attested variety. And usually it goes to E or Ü. Ü in late West Saxon. The usual reconstruction of it is as a diphthong E. E. So it's basically stationary, but it just rounds halfway through the diphthong. So E, U, E. But that's maybe the case, and it's not an easy thing for people to pronounce. So what I do is I just say E, which is a variant that we see in some varieties, and but still spell it this way. So whether I'm justified in that, I'm not totally sure. I found it pedagogically useful, but I could definitely see a different version of myself quibbling with it and saying, no, I'd rather see you do E and just be late West Saxon through and through. Yeah.
Well, I'm like you said earlier, and as much as I chatter on about phonology. Let's see if I could pronounce that word. Anyway, as much as I prattle on about those things, we're clearly of the same mind that we just want these languages to be taught, learned, especially in a way that allows the person to get a lot of input and then be able to express themselves, whether speaking through writing at some point. So, and then, pronunciation insofar as it allows us to enter in that for our languages, like if we were to put Latin and Old English on each of us respectively, phonemic vowel length, I believe is still pretty important, and like you were saying before, is more important than qualities. Are you getting more or less the right part of the vowel space, and does it have a length distinction?
Are you making all of the phonemic distinctions that you need to? So with there are minimal pairs that are distinguished by length in Old English. God and gold are.
Yeah, I noticed that
example.
one. God and gold. Gold is good. But
God is gold.
Gold is God.
Which is something that an Old English speaker probably would say.
God is gold. God is gold, to use the V2. Yeah. Well, Colin, I think we should just cut it there because I can see us exhausting ourselves for 10 hours.
Yeah, it's been known to happen.
And I would like to do that, but I think we should maybe split it up
over
a longer period. But thank you so much for being here, everybody. Colin, wait, hold on, let me write your YouTube channel, youtube.com/get the right number of L's. And there we go.
I blame Phil Collins for that. Everyone wants to spell it with 2 L's, and I understand Phil Collins is awesome.
I met a Colin with 2 L's once. Just kidding. If you're 2 L Collins, that's good. Yeah, that's everyone go subscribe to Colin's channel. Do you know what you're going to do in your next live stream?
In the next stream, we are going to be working on some more conlang. We have a language family that's influenced by Southeast Asian sort of phonological and syntactic patterns. And so we are deriving descendant languages using sound changes and semantic drift and things like that.
Tremendous. Everybody go subscribe if you want to learn Old English with Colin. You're going to do that at ancientlanguage.com. Hold on, let me write that up here. ancientlanguage.com. So you check that out, send for lessons. If you don't know if you can take it next semester, you can just write ancientlanguage.com an email, let them know that you're interested, and because that's good, that helps. That's a way to know, hey, there's a huge interest, but they can't take it this semester. That can really help planning if that's something that interests you. I certainly want to take your course. This live stream, everybody, will not be on here on the main channel, polýMATHY channel, but it will eventually appear in the coming hours or days, however long it takes me to upload it, on the polýMATHY Plus channel, which is the secondary channel to this one. So, Colin, thank you so much. Oh, hey, thank you, Faye, right?
Thank you, Faye. That's one way of saying it. Yeah, I thank you. Or othe, each the thankas do.
Each the thankas
do.
Cool. Well, we'll learn about whatever etymologies are there next time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.